me for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, as always, Andrew Zimmel. Well, we've been waiting for it all week. It is Friday, breaking down the top 20 players of the 2000s. Number 22, number 1. If you've missed any of the shows before, we went 83 through 21 all the way the rest of this week from Monday to Thursday. So if you missed any of those, you can go back and listen to them. Today, we're talking about the top players of the 2000s. I'm very excited for it. But before we talk about that, I need to remind you that we have Film Friday today as well. We're talking about the Pixar movie Onward while we all are in quarantine. I broke that one down for us, talked a little bit about what I liked, what I loved. There's not a whole lot that you can really pick apart from this movie. So let's get into it. At number 20, guy plays 6 years in this decade, has an incredible time while playing in this decade, has a Defensive Player of the Year, averaged 17.5 and 12.5, the most rebounds per game in this decade. He goes by the nickname of Superman. Ironically enough, there's two guys on this list to go by that. We're talking about Mr. Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard comes in the league out of high school, one of the pro, or what was it called? Preps to Pros was the name that we called those guys. He comes in and immediately makes an impact on that Orlando Magic team. The 6 seasons he averaged, like I mentioned, 17.5, but in the playoffs he had pretty good numbers at 19 and 14. He goes to the NBA Finals in 2009, of course, falling to Kobe Bryant and the Los Angeles Lakers. But it proved to a lot of people, that 2009 Finals run, that, yeah, he's the type of player you can build a championship team around. Now, he never got to that level. He never reached the summit, or he hasn't reached the summit yet. But the 2000s were really the building block, the cornerstone of his career, his Hall of Fame career. And that's a player that we are going to see join the likes of some of the other guys on this list later in his career. At number 19, he barely edged out Dwight Howard because he made 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards in this decade, which is simply incredible. Played 10 seasons, averaged a little under 7 and 11, but the defensive impact he had on the game of basketball cannot be overstated. Can't be overstated. The 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, Ben Wallace, he isn't in the Hall of Fame. It is a real head-scratcher, if you ask me, while he is not in the Hall of Fame. He was the cornerstone. I think him and a guy we're going to get to a little bit later on this list are the two biggest reasons that the Detroit Pistons won the title in 2004. Ben Wallace and Rasheed Wallace, to a similar extent, really did a good job of boxing up and boxing out Shaquille O'Neal in those finals. Like I said, the defensive prowess he had, his defensive win share, if you look at it, was 59.1, the highest of almost anybody else on this list. There's only one guy who I think has a higher defensive win share than Ben Wallace in this decade. His win share total is 78.2. Value of replacement puts him among some of the tops in this decade. Ben Wallace, 19 on the list. He needs to be a Hall of Famer before too much time passes, because I think there's going to be a younger generation as the game of basketball moves further and further outward, while more and more perimeter defensive players are going to get more recognition. You're thinking of guys like Kawhi and Paul George, even Patrick Beverley to a similar extent. As the game of basketball moves out, I think guys like Ben Wallace and Rudy Gobert, to a lesser extent, are going to be forgotten about, almost. They're not going to have the same impact that they once did. But Ben Wallace was one of the, if not the most dominant defensive player in the 2000s. At number 18, played 9 seasons in the decade, averaged almost 19 and 9, 18.8 points, 9 rebounds per game. He's a European big man, goes by the name of Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol was, similarly to Dwight Howard, a franchise cornerstone piece. He goes to the Memphis Grizzlies. Of course, you remember him being traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, and that really pushes them over the top in that 2009 and 2010 finals, especially in the 2010 finals. But Pau Gasol's career in the 2000s is one that it's hard to quantify now, as we've gotten an entire career of Marc Gasol as we had the grit and grind Grizzlies. But Pau Gasol was really the first player in Memphis Grizzly history, at least in my understanding, in my watching of basketball. He was the first player in Memphis Grizzly basketball history that I could really, every night you could be like, oh, Pau Gasol is the cornerstone piece. So when he goes to the Lakers and he fills that role that Shaq left, of that dominant big man presence, and he dominated the game differently than Shaq. Shaq, of course, was the obnoxious, dunk in your face, block your shot, make jokes. Pau Gasol, maybe it's because he was European, maybe it's because Kobe Bryant was so present on that team. Pau Gasol, more quiet guy, more, don't want to say passive, but his game was less, I think, in your face than Shaquille O'Neal. But still, he gets the job done, two-time champion. He wins the finals in this decade, goes to the finals with the Lakers in 2008. One of the guys on this list that goes to multiple finals in his group. The next guy on this list goes to multiple finals, or hasn't been to any finals, I should say, my bad. Hasn't been to any finals, is number 17, played 5 seasons in this decade, averaged the most assists per game with 10, 19 points per game, 4.7 rebounds per game. He's a member of the Banana Boat. It's Chris Paul. Chris Paul comes in the league a little bit after LeBron James. He wins Rookie of the Year. He is one of the players who didn't make it to an NBA Finals and is still in this group. There's about 3 guys who did not make it, or I should say about 5 guys who did not make it to an NBA Finals in this decade, but still made it this high on the list. You look at his playoff points per game, 21 points per game, 11 assists, 5 rebounds. Chris Paul, one of the, if not the best point guard in the 2000s. Easily, I think, the best point guard if you wanted to go from 2010 to 2015. But it's weird that NBA point guards, for the majority of NBA history, there was one dominant point guard, and there wasn't a ton of guys really in that same class. You want to say Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, that kind of split it up. You want to talk about guys like Gary Payton, John Stockton, that kind of debate. Chris Paul, Steph Curry, you want to make that type of debate. Steve Nash, of course, I think a little bit higher than Chris on this list, but Chris Paul's impact on the game cannot be understated. All right, number 16, the human highlight tape. It's Vince Carter, played 10 seasons in this decade. Feels like he's been in the league forever. Averaged 23 points per game, 4 assists, 5 rebounds. Played all over the place. He starts with the Raptors, goes to the Nets, was on a couple of those finals teams. Why is he 16 on this list and not higher? Well, it's hard to say. Mostly because of people forget of kind of the off-the-court stuff that went along with Vince Carter. His image is kind of reshaping and really changed the way that people look at him. But I think that Vince Carter, at 16 on this list, feels right. Like, I don't think that you can make much of a case that he's higher than the rest of these guys on this list. Maybe at number 15, but still, it's hard for me to say Vince Carter was better than any of the guys ahead of him. And, you know, it's tough. The lack of playoff success, that kind of stands out to me. The fact that he never really got over the hump, that kind of stands out to me too. But you got to give him some credit for the longevity of his career. At number 15, it's Carmelo Anthony. I put Carmelo at 15. I put LeBron at 14. Here's why. Carmelo goes to the Western Conference Finals in 2009. That is the furthest he went this decade in the playoffs. He was a big catalyst to that team. A guy a little bit higher ahead of him is really the part, I think, the biggest reason that they made it to the finals. He's 15 on this list, and LeBron is 14. Why is LeBron not higher? Well, the 07 finals, of course, was dominating. 06, he had an incredible season, but again, he never gets over the hump in this decade. 2009 was the year that he should have been there. He goes to the Eastern Conference Finals and then loses. He never really doesn't get over the hump in this decade, and that's kind of what holds him back. But he does make he makes, I want to say, 6 He makes 6 All-Star Game appearances in this decade, which is something that stands out. Averages 29, 7, and 8 in the playoffs. LeBron James, you can make a case that he deserves to be a little bit higher, but again, he doesn't win a title, and that's what holds him back. And then when we talk about what we did last week when we said the best players of the decade, it makes sense that he would be where he was on the 2010s. But in the 2000s, there's just too many guys who are just better than him, who won more, who just... LeBron comes in at 7 seasons. The rest of these guys from number 10 up played all 10 seasons of the decade. So they're going to have more stats. They're going to have more impact on the decade. The longer you play, the more stats you're going to have. At number 13, it's Tony Parker. 9 seasons of the decade, averaged 16 and 5. I should say almost 16 and 6. Wins the NBA Finals multiple times with the Spurs. Wins the MVP, Finals MVP in 2007 against LeBron James. That's another reason why he is a little bit ahead of LeBron. Look, you could say let's break 16 through 14 down. You can make a case that any of those guys deserve to be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. But to me, Tony Parker at 13 fits. The French Bolt that he was, he comes over as a young player, immediately has an impact on that Spurs franchise, immediately is one of the players that really pushes them over the hump. Tony Parker at 13. At number 12, the truth, Paul Pierce. 10 seasons in the decade, averaged 23, 4, and 6. True shooting percentage of 56%. His offensive win share and defensive win share are pretty good. His win share total, though, at 99.5. Only guy with a higher win share than him earlier in the decade would be LeBron James, who had 100. He is the highest win share total that isn't in the top 10. So, 99.5. His value over replacement, of course, 44.9. Again, you could make a case LeBron should be higher on this list, and I would hear it. But again, not going to the NBA Finals, or I should say going to the NBA Finals and losing is rewarded. That's why he's higher than some of the other guys. But the rest of these dudes either won a title, went to multiple NBA Finals games, or won more. They just were winners, and LeBron just didn't get over that threshold. At number 11, Dwayne Wade, LeBron's counterpart. At 11, barely misses the top 10. 7 seasons, 25 points per game, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. Wins the Finals MVP in 2006. Wins the MVP, or almost should have won the MVP, I think, in 2009. You can make a case that he was better than LeBron in that season. LeBron wins that MVP. A dude who catalyst for revitalizing, rejuvenating Miami Heat basketball. Of course, you're going to remember him from the 2010s where he creates the Heatles. But Dwayne Wade's impact on the game can't be understated, similar to some of the other guys who you can see because of the retirement tour that he was on, just the impact he had on the game of basketball. In the 2000s, of course, a bunch of iconic moments, game winners, winning the finals in 2006, hitting all those free throws. Mavericks fans might want to call it rigged, but the rest of us can see it and say that that was just an incredible performance. All right, moving on to the top 10. At number 10, it's Jason Kidd. At number 9, it's Chauncey Billups. And at number 8, it's Steve Nash. I want to break those three down because they all play the same position. Why is Kidd 10 and Billups is 9? Well, not only did Chauncey win a title, something Jason Kidd couldn't do as this premier player, but Chauncey Billups won the Finals MVP in 2004. He then goes to the Nuggets, and he is a big reason why the Nuggets go to the NBA Finals that year. Go to the Western Conference Finals that year and compete with Kobe as well as they did. Jason Kidd is one of the best point guards of the decade, but again, his lack of shooting ability and the fact that he never could get on a team that really worked for him. It's funny. We talk about player movement, player empowerment in the 2010s and how this was the decade that everybody moved around. But then you look at guys like Kidd. You look at guys like Kidd and Nash and Billups, all who play for multiple teams, all win at different places. Of course, Steve Nash is going to be higher than all those guys at number 8 because of the 2 MVPs that he won. If you want to say that he stole them from Shaq and Kobe, you can make that case. I think that Steve Nash was the best point guard of the decade, and that's why he's where he is on this list. Steve Nash, the engine, the motor of that 7-second or less Suns team. Fun fact about Steve Nash, if not a lot of people know, is that he gets drafted by the Suns. I think a lot of young people forget that. Goes to the Mavericks, comes back to the Suns, and this is, I want to say, the first time in my life that I saw a player who got drafted by the team go back to the team that drafted him. And I think that that's really interesting. And that his entire career, because he won those 2 MVPs, but mostly because of D'Antoni and that 7-second or less offense, his career, when he goes in the Hall of Fame, is going to be remembered more as a Sun than he is anything else, even though he played for the Mavs and Lakers. Fun fact, things I don't think a ton of people think about. At number 7, this is where we're really cutting some teeth here. 7 is Tracy McGrady. 6 is Allen Iverson. Tracy McGrady, the greatest scorer of the 2000s that didn't win a ring. I said it here, I'll say it again. Best scorer of the decade who never was able to get over that hump. In the regular season, he averaged 24 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists. In the playoffs, he did pretty good too. 29.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 7 assists in the playoffs. His value over replacement, 41.1. Win share is 81.6. Again, if he could have stayed healthy, he would have been the best scorer, I think, of all time. He probably would have won a ring. But the fact that he couldn't stay healthy, we're always going to have that 2002-2003 Tracy McGrady season. And of course, as a Spurs fan, I'll never forget when he scored 13 points in 33 seconds. Some of the things never die. At number 6, Allen Iverson. You remember him from stepping over Ty Lue. What you forget about is that he was the only good player on that 76ers team. That 76ers team, pretty bad. Eric Snow, Dikembe Mutombo. If you want to say that there was some real talent on that team, fine. But to me, Allen Iverson was one of the first players to carry a team to the finals in this decade. When you talk about this in the last 20 years, if you want to talk about a player who just consistently was carrying his team, Iverson did that. And he goes to Denver with Carmelo, and of course that fit doesn't really make a ton of sense. 2 scorers. Great player. Really wish that he's another guy that I wish could have gotten over the hump and won a ring. That's why he's 6 on the list. Top 5. Okay, at number 5, MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Kevin Garnett. At number 4, Shaquille O'Neal. At number 3, Dirk Nowitzki. At number 2, champion, Old Man Riverwalk, it's Tim Duncan, and number 1 is Kobe Bryant. Okay, so let's talk about the top 5. Why is Kobe 1? Why is Garnett 5? Well, here's the thing. Kobe scores the most points in the decade at 28.5. He is winning a ton of games. He goes to 6 NBA finals in this decade, winning 4 of them, winning 2 finals MVPs. I didn't count the 2000 championship because I thought it goes from 91 to 2000 and the 2000-2001 season to the 2009-2010 season. So he's got 6 finals appearances in 4 rings, 10-time All-Star, 2-time Finals MVP. He barely edges out Tim Duncan, who goes to 3 NBA Finals, winning 3 championships. Okay, again, the 99 title goes into the last decade. Duncan is the other player who you really can make a case for. His defensive win share was 63.5. That's the highest of the decade. And his total win share is 27.8. You talk about the best win share of the decade, it would be Duncan it would be Duncan at 127.8, and then you would talk about Kevin Garnett at 127.4, I want to say. And then you talk about, of course, the best win share of the decade is Dirk Nowitzki at 141.3. 141.3 with one of the best value over replacement. I think the only guy who had a better value over replacement was Kevin Garnett, and he did at 61. All of these guys, incredible talents. All of these guys, NBA champions in the decade. Well, let me rephrase that. All these guys NBA champions in the decade except Dirk, who got robbed in 2006. MVPs, Defensive Player of the Years. If you did the average of all of these guys, you would be looking at somewhere between 25 points per game and like almost 10 rebounds per game. The decade that was remembered most, I think, for the big man. This is the last time, I think, for a while, we're going to have, of the top five, a forward, a center, a forward, and a guard. This is the last time that we're going to have that. I think in the next, when you talk about the 2010s, when we did the best players of the decade, the top five was Westbrook, a guard, Harden, a guard, Curry, a guard, Durant, a forward, LeBron, a forward. So that's what the NBA is leaning to, perimeter players. But I think the 2000s is the last time that we're going to get these dominant big men. And it's a shame, but at the same time, that's the progression of the game. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you guys found it entertaining. If you guys want more of this type of stuff, let me know. I had fun making the list and compiling the list. Next week, we're going to potentially have a couple college football players call into the show, do a little bit of interviews with them, so hopefully we can do that. We're going to have Film Friday today, too. You want to check that out. And next week, we don't know what's going to come because Alexander will be on, but besides that, we don't know if this quarantine is going to get better, if it's going to get worse, the coronavirus is going to let up. We don't know any of that type of stuff. So I'm very excited to continue to do this podcast. Very excited to have you guys continue to listen to it. So that's going to do it for the show. I will hopefully talk to you guys next week.